Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Telescope Maker's Workshop. My name is Francis O'Reilly and today is July 9th, 2009. I'm at the home of amateur telescope making in the United States of America. What, you say? The house behind me isn't pink? You're right, it's not. I'm not at Stellafane. I'm at the Draper Estate in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, about 5 miles north of the New York City line with the Bronx in Westchester County, New York. The Draper Estate is where Henry Draper made a 15.5-inch parabolic telescope mirror and later wrote an article about it that was published in Smithsonian's Contributions to Knowledge, a series of articles published in book form in a publication that began in 1848 and continued through to 1916. This article, which has been heavily referred to in Amateur Telescope Making Volume 1, although referred to as being scarcer than pigs in Palestine, was the article that I believe that Russell Porter used in learning how to make telescope mirrors. Henry Draper, as a young man, attended medical school. His father, John Draper, actually assisted in founding New York University's medical school. He was a chemist. Young Henry went to medical school and at the age of 20 graduated. As he was too young to practice medicine in New York State, he took a trip to Europe, as many young folk do, even to this day. At that time he met with John Draper and learned something of the telescope making art. Upon his return to New York in 1862, he attempted to make a telescope mirror out of speculum metal. One cold day in November of 1862, that mirror, which he had worked on the night before, had some water left in it, and the water got into a fissure in the mirror, and the speculum mirror cracked. Young Henry was frustrated. He then shifted to glass. He used what I believe to be an old porthole that he had probably recovered from a marine salvage yard, possibly down here on the Hudson River, somewhere between Manhattan and Hastings. And that's my guess. I don't have anything to prove that. The mirror appears to be a plate glass mirror. He polished it, ground it and polished it, and figured it into a parabola, and used it in what was at the time the largest reflecting telescope in the United States of America. He silvered the mirror and built the telescope and mounted it in the house behind me. Once the mirror was mounted, he used the telescope to observe the Orion Nebula and to observe the moon. The moon was of particular interest as Henry Draper's father, John, who had founded New York University Medical School with others, was also the first person to photograph the moon some years before, a daguerreotype photo. Hastings-on-Hudson today is in the middle of a very populated urban area. Light pollution abounds. The Hudson River is less than a mile from where I stand. In the 1860s, before the day of widespread electrical distribution, there was very little light pollution, and while the atmosphere here is clearly humid, it was a much more appropriate site for an observatory than it is today. Certainly still not an ideal site, but much more appropriate than it is today. The field I am standing in, next to the Draper Estate, is used on occasion for public star parties run by the Westchester amateur astronomers, referred to as Moon over Hastings. Draper died at the age of 45 from pneumonia, suddenly, after a trip to Colorado. Upon Draper's death, the telescope-making craft stood still for a while, for about 40 years. In 1902, his observatory was destroyed. About 20 years after he died, his observatory was destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt, and many of the parts of his telescope are still here today. On display inside the Draper are various elements of Henry Draper's telescope. Some we can identify readily, others are less certain. I should note that I said earlier that the dome was destroyed by fire in 1862. I'm sorry, 1902. That's incorrect. It was destroyed by fire in 2005. What we have here is a Alvin Clark refracting telescope, which is used on occasion for star parties. A wonderful instrument. I believe it's a 5-inch aperture, roughly f/15. A photo of Henry Draper mounted on the wall. Actually a photo, I say a photo. A portrait of Henry Draper mounted on the wall at the Draper estate. Here we have Dr. Draper's 15.5-inch silvered glass mirror. It's kept in a box in the basement of the Hastings Historical Society, and as you can see, the silver has largely corroded. Originally, I understand, it was kept under a shelf. When the curators of the museum found out what it was, they immediately corrected that problem and put it in a box on a shelf, and it's being well cared for. We don't know anything about the focal length of the mirror, although it appears to be about an f/8 from the photographs of the observatory that I've seen from the late 1800s. The shape Dr. Draper was able to attain, we're not sure. We would hope it would be a parabola, but we just don't know at this time. What we're hoping to do, and at the time you may be watching this, what we may have succeeded in doing is having an event here at the Draper where we can actually test it, both by Foucault testing, autocollimation, and possibly interferometry. Obviously what we need to do that would be a reasonable sized flat, a flat that would be at least 16 inches in diameter that would be cored. That would be the ideal manner in which to test this. To take readings with the Foucault test may be problematic due to the deteriorated coatings on it. Very special piece of glass. Dr. Draper apparently, as you can see, obtained this glass. It appears to have been possibly a porthole. It's relatively thin, about an inch, so it does not meet today's standard of the 1:6 thickness to diameter ratio. It appears to be what we would call today a thin glass mirror, and it's actually what we would say would be at the very low end of a large amateur telescope. Here we have a machined piece of the mount. Looks like it may have been cast and machined. It's currently upside down, but the telescope rested on this. This is the Venus transit room. During a transit of Venus, this room was used to observe the transit. You can see there are two narrow windows, a line in the ceiling to the other side of the house. And then there's a large window